The desert sun had turned Fort Kellerman into an oven by noon, and the air carried that unmistakable military scent of hot metal, diesel exhaust, and machinery oil that clung to everything. Generators hummed constantly in the background, punctuated by distant rifle fire from the training ranges and the steady thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the heat. Rebecca Martinez moved through the base with quiet precision, her worn coveralls and faded tool bag marking her as just another civilian contractor in a sea of uniformed personnel. At 43, she had the kind of weathered competence that came from decades of working with her hands, fixing the complex systems that kept military operations running smoothly. Her contractor badge read Communication Specialist, and to anyone who bothered to look, that's exactly what she appeared to be. She had just finished repairing a signal relay outside the communications bay, a loose connection that could have caused transmission failures during critical operations. The work was precise, methodical, the kind of repair that required understanding not just how equipment worked, but how it failed under stress. Rebecca climbed down from her ladder and gave a professional nod to the young corporal nearby, who barely glanced up from his paperwork. Across the quad, the base showed signs of elevated activity that made experienced personnel take notice. Officers walked with purposeful strides, their conversations hushed but urgent. Staff sergeants moved between buildings with clipboards and serious expressions. Something important was happening, and everyone who had been in the military long enough could feel the tension building like pressure before a storm. Colonel Marcus Thompson stood near the command post, his phone pressed to his ear while scanning the perimeter with the practiced eyes of someone who had learned that complacency could be fatal. His face carried the weight of responsibility that came with commanding a forward operating base in an environment where the wrong decision could mean flag-draped coffins and grieving families back home. Audit team wheels down in 30. Thompson snapped into his phone, his voice carrying across the concrete. I want every procedure followed to the letter. No surprises, no exceptions, no room for interpretation. Staff Sergeant Kyle Richards stood nearby, trying to project an air of importance while secretly struggling with the kind of insecurity that came from having authority without the experience to back it up. At 26, Richards had confidence that outweighed his competence, and his uniform was regulation perfect in the way that suggested he spent more time on appearance than substance. He had been having a particularly difficult month, with a failed promotion board and several missed opportunities that left him looking for someone to blame for his frustrations. Thompson turned to Richards with the focused attention of a commander who understood that inspection failures could end careers. You're on checkpoint duty for the primary security screening. I want everything flagged, everything documented, everything done exactly by the book. The Inspector General's people are looking for anything they can write up in their report. Richards nodded with enthusiasm that barely concealed his eagerness to prove himself. Yes, sir. Zero tolerance approach. Complete compliance verification. Good. Remember, these audits can make or break careers, including mine and yours. Thompson disappeared into the command building, leaving Richards alone with his checklist and something to prove to his superiors. Rebecca finished packing her tools and headed toward the north checkpoint, the most direct route to her next repair assignment. She walked steadily across the sun-baked pavement, her tool bag balanced comfortably in her right hand, moving with the kind of purposeful efficiency that came from years of navigating military installations, where time was always critical, and delays were never acceptable. Richard spotted her approach from his position at the checkpoint booth, his attention immediately drawn to the contractor badge on her vest. Something about her quiet confidence struck him wrong, though he couldn't have articulated exactly what bothered him. Maybe it was the way she moved through his checkpoint, like she belonged there. Or maybe she just represented an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of thorough security procedures that might impress his superiors during the upcoming audit. The FISD checkpoint area was designed for efficiency rather than comfort, with concrete barriers and metal detectors that had processed thousands of personnel over the years. Other soldiers moved through nearby entry points with the casual familiarity of people who had completed this routine hundreds of times. But conversations began to drop to murmurs as personnel sensed something crossing the line from routine procedure into something more troubling. As Rebecca approached the security station, she had no way of knowing that her quiet morning was about to become something that would change how everyone at Fort Kellerman thought about respect, authority, and the dangerous assumptions people made about others based on appearance alone. The desert heat continued to rise from the concrete, and somewhere in the distance, the helicopter lifted off with the steady rhythm that had become the soundtrack of military life in a place where the mission never stopped. And the cost of failure was measured in lives rather than paperwork. "Ma'am," Richards called out before Rebecca reached the security booth, his voice carrying an edge of officious authority that made nearby personnel glance in their direction. "I need to see your credentials and verify your authorization." Rebecca slowed her pace and met his eyes calmly, recognizing the tone of someone who was looking for problems rather than simply doing his job. She had dealt with officious bureaucrats in places where the stakes were considerably higher than a routine base inspection. "Right here," she said, tapping the laminated badge clipped to her vest with practiced patience. Richards examined the credential with exaggerated care, holding it up to the light and comparing the photograph to her face with theatrical thoroughness. "Protocol requires enhanced verification of all non-military personnel," he announced loudly enough for other soldiers to hear. "New security measures came down from command this morning." Rebecca waited without comment, her expression unchanged. She understood that arguing with petty authority often made situations worse, and she had learned long ago to pick her battles carefully. The checkpoint was beginning to draw more attention than usual, with personnel slowing their movements to observe what was happening. "Says here, your clearance covers communication systems," Richards continued, studying the badge like he was deciphering classified intelligence. "Doesn't specifically mention electrical infrastructure or power distribution systems." Communications systems include power distribution since the manual update 6 months ago, Rebecca replied evenly. "The classification covers all supporting infrastructure necessary for operational communications." Richards frowned, clearly annoyed that she had responded with specific regulatory knowledge rather than confused compliance. "Regulations change frequently. I'm going to need additional verification before I can authorize your passage." That was when Private Jackson pulled out his phone, angling it low to capture what was developing into an entertaining confrontation. Military life could be monotonous, and anything that broke the routine was worth documenting for later sharing with friends who would appreciate the drama. "Standard electromagnetic security protocols," Richards announced with increasing volume, playing to his growing audience of soldiers who had paused their own activities to watch. "Need to verify you're not carrying any unauthorized electronic devices that could compromise base security. Could be concealed in clothing or personal effects." That was a lie, and everyone with legitimate security training knew it. The screening procedures for contractor personnel were clearly defined in regulations that Richard should have memorized, and they didn't include the kind of invasive searches he was suggesting. But the gathered personnel weren't challenging his authority, and the attention was feeding his confidence. Rebecca stood there for a long moment, her expression unchanged, weighing her options with the kind of careful calculation that came from experience in situations where the wrong choice could have serious consequences. She could have demanded to speak with his supervisor, cited the actual regulations, or simply walked away and returned when a different guard was on duty. Instead, she set her tool bag down on the concrete and began unzipping her coveralls with calm deliberation. "She's actually doing it," Jackson whispered to the soldier next to him. His phone camera now focused directly on Rebecca as she complied with Richard's unauthorized demands. The fabric parted to reveal a plain black t-shirt underneath, and Rebecca pulled the coveralls down to her waist before standing with her arms at her sides, her posture straight and professional. The gathered personnel stared with the kind of ugly curiosity that turned human dignity into entertainment. And Jackson continued recording with the casual cruelty of someone who saw another person's humiliation as content for social media. "Satisfied?" Rebecca asked, her voice carrying no anger or embarrassment, just the flat professionalism of someone completing an assigned task. Richards grinned with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully asserted his authority over another person. "Need full inspection from all angles. Turn around slowly." And that's when she turned, revealing what no one in that checkpoint area was prepared to see. The black t-shirt was thin and worn, clinging to her torso in a way that revealed everything, including the scar tissue that ran across her lower abdomen like a roadmap of trauma survived. It wasn't surgical precision or clean medical work. The scar was thick, irregular, and brutal, starting below her rib cage and tracing a jagged path toward her hip. The kind of wound that came from desperate field surgery performed with whatever tools were available while the world exploded around the medic trying to save a life. Skin that had been burned in places, stitched and restitched with smaller scars branching off like tributaries of pain. You didn't get a scar like that from training accidents or civilian mishaps. You got it in forward operating bases and black sites, on missions that officially never happened, in places where survival depended on the skill of combat medics working under fire with improvised equipment and pure determination. The checkpoint area fell silent with the kind of uncomfortable quiet that followed the realization that entertainment had crossed into something much more serious than anyone had anticipated. Most of the watching soldiers didn't understand what they were looking at, seeing only an old injury from what they assumed was some kind of accident from Rebecca's younger days when she might have been less careful around machinery. The scar was dramatic, certainly, but without context, it was just evidence of past misfortune rather than service. Jackson was still recording, zooming in with his phone camera and providing commentary for his future social media audience. "Check out the hardware damage," he said, with the casual cruelty of someone who had never seen real trauma. "Probably got that working on cars or something mechanical." Private Morrison laughed nervously, the kind of uncomfortable sound people make when they're not sure whether something is funny or terrible. "Looks like she tangled with the wrong piece of equipment. Must have been some accident." But Sergeant Martinez, whose grandfather had served 3 tours in Vietnam and told him stories about operations that never made the official histories, felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen photographs of wounds like that before, in albums his grandfather burned after showing them to him once. The kind of trauma that came from explosions and emergency surgery performed under fire by medics who were trying to save lives while everything around them was trying to kill them. Richards was still grinning, still playing to his audience of junior soldiers who were looking for entertainment to break up the monotony of base life. "Anything else you want to declare, ma'am?" he asked with mock professionalism. "Any other hardware we should know about?" Jackson adjusted his phone angle to get better footage, already planning how he would edit this into something worth posting. "This is definitely going on social media," he murmured to Morrison. "This is too good not to share." Rebecca began to turn back around, her movements unhurried and professional, like she was completing a routine task assigned by someone with legitimate authority, rather than submitting to the whims of a bully with delusions of importance. There was no shame in her posture, no anger in her expression, just the quiet dignity of someone who had endured worse humiliations than public strip searches and somehow found the strength to survive them all. That's when Colonel Thompson emerged from the command building with two senior officers, conducting what was supposed to be a routine inspection tour in preparation for the arriving audit team. The folder in his hand hit the concrete with a sharp crack that echoed across the checkpoint area like a gunshot. His escort officers, a major and a captain, looked at him in confusion, then followed his gaze to the woman standing half-dressed in the middle of their security screening area while junior enlisted personnel recorded her humiliation for their personal entertainment. "Mother of God," Thompson whispered, because he had seen scars like that before. Not in person, not often, but enough times in classified briefings and medical reports that were shredded immediately after reading. The kind of trauma that appeared in after-action reports from operations so classified they were buried beneath layers of security clearance that most people with legitimate need to know never even knew existed. Thompson had been a captain in Afghanistan, assigned to intelligence coordination at Bagram Air Base during the height of combat operations. He had seen the medical reports from missions that went sideways, operations where the line between success and catastrophe was measured in seconds and inches of ground gained or lost. He knew about the helicopter insertions that turned into desperate extraction attempts, about the operators who disappeared behind enemy lines and somehow made it back, carrying intelligence that prevented major disasters. He also knew that those operators were often given new identities and strict instructions to disappear into civilian life after their service. Their military records classified beyond the reach of normal bureaucratic inquiry. Their sacrifices were acknowledged in ceremonies that never happened, their heroism recognized in awards that were never publicly presented. Rebecca Martinez wasn't just a contractor fixing communication equipment. She was a ghost made flesh, the kind of ghost that defense departments created when heroes needed to vanish for the greater good of national security and their own protection. Richards was still performing for his audience, still enjoying the real power dynamic he had created through his abuse of authority. "Take your time with the inspection, ma'am," he said with mock courtesy. "We want to make sure everything is properly documented for the audit." Jackson was adjusting his recording angle again, trying to capture both Rebecca's scar and Richard's commentary for what he was sure would be viral content. "This is better than anything on television," he said to Martinez, not noticing the expression of growing horror on the sergeant's face. Rebecca finished turning around and began to pull her coveralls back up, zipping them with the same unhurried precision she had used to remove them. No demands for apologies, no angry confrontations, no theatrical displays of wounded dignity. Just the quiet professionalism of someone who understood that some battles weren't worth fighting and others were too important to lose. That's when Thompson found his voice, cutting through the checkpoint noise with the kind of authority that came from making life and death decisions in places where the wrong choice meant flag-draped coffins and grieving families waiting at Dover Air Force Base. "Stand down, Sergeant," he said, his words slicing through the morning air like a blade through silk. Immediately, every conversation stopped. Every tool went quiet. Even the distant sound of helicopter rotors seemed to pause in respect for the authority in Thompson's command. The checkpoint area transformed from a scene of casual entertainment into something that felt dangerous and unpredictable. Richard spun around, his face cycling through several shades of pale as he realized who was watching his performance. His confident grin collapsed into nervous confusion, and his hands began to shake slightly as the full implications of the situation started to penetrate his awareness. "Sir," he stammered, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of what had seemed like a successful assertion of authority. "Just conducting routine security verification under the enhanced protocols you established this morning," I said. "Stand down." Thompson's voice carried the kind of quiet menace that experienced soldiers recognized as more dangerous than shouting. He walked across the concrete with deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's face, studying her with the intensity of someone who was beginning to understand exactly who he was looking at. The two officers with him, Major Collins and Captain Rodriguez, hung back near the command building. They didn't understand what was happening, but they recognized the expression on their colonel's face. It was the same look he got when classified communications came in from higher headquarters, the kind that required immediate action and absolute discretion. Jackson was still holding his phone up, his finger hovering over the record button, uncertain whether he should continue filming or delete what he had already captured. The entertainment value of the situation was rapidly being replaced by something that felt much more serious and potentially career-ending. "Ma'am," Thompson said quietly, his tone completely different from the command voice he had used on Richards. "You can get dressed. Take your time." Rebecca nodded once and continued pulling her coveralls back up, her movements maintaining the same professional calm she had displayed throughout the entire incident. When she was fully dressed again, she picked up her tool bag and stood waiting for whatever came next, her expression giving away nothing about what she might be thinking or feeling. Thompson stepped closer, close enough that his next words were meant for her alone, spoken in the tone reserved for conversations that would never appear in any official record or incident report. "Operations like yours were officially terminated in 2014, he said softly, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the base. "Officially," Rebecca replied, her voice equally quiet. "There are no service records for what you did. That was the point." Thompson studied her face, seeing details there that most people would miss. The way her eyes tracked movement without appearing to watch anything specific. The slight scarring on her knuckles that came from close-quarters combat training. The way she stood with her weight balanced, always ready to move in any direction. The controlled breathing patterns of someone who had learned to manage stress in situations where panic meant death. "You're not supposed to exist," he said. "Neither is half the equipment on this base," she replied. "But here we are." That observation got his attention because she was absolutely right. Fort Kellerman housed experimental communication systems and prototype technology that existed in classified budgets but not in official inventories. Equipment that required security clearances he didn't have access to, maintained by personnel whose backgrounds were need-to-know only. Thompson turned to face the assembled soldiers, who were watching this exchange with the growing realization that they had just stepped into something far beyond their understanding or pay grade. Richards looked like he wanted to disappear into the concrete. Jackson was pale as desert sand. Morrison kept glancing between Thompson and Rebecca like he was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Everyone clear this area," Thompson said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "Right now." "Sir, we've got scheduled personnel processing," Martinez started, trying to maintain some semblance of normal operations. "I don't care. If you've got the Secretary of Defense scheduled for inspection," Thompson replied, "clear this checkpoint immediately. Anyone who discusses what just happened will find themselves washing dishes in the mess hall until their enlistment expires." The soldiers scattered like leaves in a hurricane, but the damage was already done. The story would spread through the base in the way military gossip always did, through shift changes and maintenance briefings, each telling carrying a little more weight than the last. Richards tried to linger, tried to explain, tried to salvage something from the complete destruction of his authority and career prospects. "Sir, I was just following the enhanced security protocols that came down from command this morning." Staff Sergeant Richards, Thompson's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying than his earlier commands. "Report to my office at 1500 hours. Bring your section leader and your first sergeant. We're going to have A detailed conversation about what protocol actually means and how it applies to personnel with security clearances you don't have access to. Richard's face went white. A meeting with the base commander in the presence of his entire chain of command usually meant paperwork that followed you for the rest of your military career, the kind of documentation that turned promotion boards into formalities and overseas assignments into punishments. When the checkpoint area was empty, except for Thompson, his officers, and Rebecca, the colonel pulled out his secure phone and made a call to a number that wasn't listed in any directory, accessible to normal military personnel. "This is Thompson at Kellerman," he said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who understood he was dealing with classified matters beyond his normal authority. "I need immediate verification on contractor personnel. Rebecca Martinez. Background. Check Priority Alpha." He listened for a moment, his expression growing more serious with each second of the conversation. The responses he was getting were clearly not what he had expected. "I see. And the classification level on her previous service record?" Another pause. "Understood. What about current operational status?" A longer pause this time. "Copy that. And if someone had hypothetically compromised her cover identification through unauthorized screening procedures?" He waited. "I understand completely. Thank you." Thompson ended the call and looked at Rebecca, who had calmly retrieved her work schedule and was reviewing her next repair assignment like nothing significant had happened. Her professional demeanor in the face of public humiliation was telling him everything he needed to know about who she really was. "They tell me you have security clearances I'm not authorized to ask about," he said. "Then don't ask," Rebecca replied without looking up from her paperwork. "But I can provide whatever support you need to complete your assignments here." She looked up from her schedule. "I just need to finish my repairs and file my completion reports, same as any other day." "After what just happened, you want to keep working?" "After what just happened, these jobs need to get done right." Her response told Thompson everything he needed to know about her character. She was the kind of person who completed the mission, regardless of personal cost, who maintained professional standards even when surrounded by people who didn't understand the meaning of either concept. Thompson made another call, this one to his commanding officer at regional headquarters. "Sir, this is Thompson. I need to report an incident involving classified personnel and request immediate guidance on protective protocols." He explained the situation in careful terms, avoiding specifics that might compromise ongoing operations, while making it clear that serious mistakes have been made. The response was swift and unambiguous. Any personnel who had shown disrespect to the contractor in question would receive immediate corrective training. The incident would be classified and any recordings would be confiscated and destroyed. Most importantly, Rebecca Martinez would receive unrestricted base access and any support necessary to complete her assignments. For the next 3 hours, Rebecca worked with the kind of quiet competence that made experienced officers take notice and remember why professionals were different from people who were just doing jobs. She didn't simply repair equipment. She understood it on a level that went beyond technical manuals and diagnostic procedures. She could identify stress points in electrical systems that wouldn't show up on instruments for another 1,000 hours of operation. She found design flaws in communication equipment that teams of engineers had overlooked during acceptance testing. She worked like someone who had maintained critical systems in environments where failure meant people died, who had made repairs with improvised tools while under fire. Master Sergeant Williams, the senior maintenance NCO who had been fixing military equipment since before most of the current unit was born, stopped by to observe her work on a power distribution panel. He didn't say anything initially, just watched as she traced electrical pathways with her fingertips, feeling for irregularities that sophisticated multimeters might miss. Ground fault on circuit 7, she announced without looking up from her work. Probably been intermittent for weeks, but getting worse under load. Williams checked his maintenance logs on his tablet. Sure enough, technicians had been reporting occasional power fluctuations in that sector for the past month. Nothing serious enough to shut down operations, but enough to make experienced electricians nervous about long-term system reliability. "How did you spot that without running full diagnostics?" he asked. "Thermal variance in the conductor housing," Rebecca explained, guiding his hand to a junction box where he could feel the subtle difference in heat distribution. Different expansion rates when there's current leakage. You can feel it if you know what to look for. Williams had been maintaining military electrical systems for over 20 years, but he was learning techniques he had never considered. This wasn't textbook knowledge or classroom theory. This was field experience earned in places where power failures meant operational disaster and repair delays weren't acceptable options. Word of what had happened was already spreading through Fort Kellerman, and that way military gossip always moved, quietly through maintenance crews and shift changes, each telling carrying a little more weight and detail than the last. By the time Rebecca was halfway through her repair schedule, senior NCOs were finding excuses to walk through her work areas. The story varied in details depending on who was telling it, but the core remained consistent. A contractor had been publicly humiliated by junior personnel, and that contractor had turned out to be someone whose service record was classified at levels most people couldn't even imagine. The implications were making experienced soldiers uncomfortable in ways they couldn't fully articulate. Staff Sergeant Martinez found Richards in the enlisted club that evening, staring into a beer he wasn't drinking. The young NCO looked like someone who had just realized his career might be over before it had really begun. "Mind if I sit?" Martinez asked. Richards shrugged without looking up. His confidence from that morning completely evaporated. Martinez settled into the chair across from him. "You understand what you did today?" "Everyone keeps asking me that question, because everyone wants to make sure you learn from it. That woman you humiliated today, she's the kind of person this whole base exists to support. The kind who does the jobs that let the rest of us sleep safely at night." Richards looked up for the first time. "How do you know that?" 20 years in this business, you learn to recognize certain things. The way she handled her tools. The way she found problems our best technicians had missed completely. The way she carried herself when you tried to break her down. Martinez paused, choosing his words carefully. But mostly it was the way Colonel Thompson reacted when he saw what was happening. I've never seen him look like that before. What should I have done differently? Ask questions before making assumptions. Treated her with the respect you'd want if you were in her position. Remembered that the uniform is supposed to mean something beyond just having authority over other people. Meanwhile, Thompson was in his office making calls that would have consequences far beyond Fort Kellerman. The incident had been reported up the chain of command, and the response was swift and comprehensive. By evening, new standing orders had been issued regarding the treatment of contractor personnel with classified backgrounds. Master Sergeant Williams incorporated the incident into his orientation program for new personnel arriving at the base. Not the specific details, which remained classified, but the principle behind it. Treat people with respect until they prove they don't deserve it. Ask questions before making judgments. And remember that you never know who you're dealing with until it might be too late to change your approach. The real consequences, however, were just beginning. Jackson discovered that the video he had recorded was automatically flagged by base security systems and confiscated before he could post it anywhere. His phone was returned to him wiped clean, and he was informed that any attempt to recreate or discuss the recording would result in immediate disciplinary action. Richards received official notification that he would be attending mandatory training. on the proper treatment of personnel with classified backgrounds. The training was scheduled to last 2 weeks and would be conducted by instructors from higher headquarters who specialized in security protocols for sensitive operations. But the most significant change was in the atmosphere of the base itself. Within days, the way contractor personnel were treated had shifted noticeably. Security screenings became professional rather than adversarial. Questions were asked respectfully rather than accusingly. The assumption changed from suspicion to respect, and the difference was obvious to anyone who paid attention. Rebecca completed her remaining repairs with the same quiet competence she had shown all morning. But now her work was being observed by people who understood what real expertise looked like. Each problem she identified and solved reinforced the growing realization that they had been dealing with someone whose qualifications went far beyond what appeared on her contractor badge. When she finished her final repair and submitted her completion report, it contained 4 recommendations that would prevent infrastructure failures no one else had even considered possible. The report was thorough, professional, and demonstrated a level of understanding that impressed experienced maintenance supervisors who had thought they had seen everything. Colonel Thompson reviewed her report twice before signing off on it, recognizing that he was looking at work that exceeded military standards by a significant margin. The recommendations alone would save the base thousands of dollars in prevented failures and improved efficiency. As Rebecca packed her tools to leave, Thompson approached her one final time. "You don't have to come back here," he said quietly. "I can ensure you get assignments at installations where the personnel understand what respect means." Rebecca shouldered her tool bag and looked back at the checkpoint area where she had been humiliated just hours earlier. "I'll be back next week for the follow-up maintenance," she said. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the training. Areas where young soldiers were learning to trust their lives to equipment maintained by people they would never meet. Because those kids need to understand that the quiet ones have stories too. And sometimes, those stories matter more than the loud ones. At 1500 hours sharp, Staff Sergeant Richards stood outside Colonel Thompson's office in his dress uniform, the fabric pressed to perfection, but his hands trembling slightly with nervous energy. His section leader, Sergeant First Class Mills, waited beside him with the kind of expression that clearly indicated this conversation wasn't going to end well for anyone involved. "Remember," Mills said quietly, adjusting his own uniform one final time, "tell the truth. Don't try to justify what happened. Don't make excuses. Just acknowledge the mistake and show that you understand why it was wrong." The office door opened, and Thompson's aide gestured them inside. The colonel sat behind his desk with the kind of controlled calm that experienced soldiers recognized as more dangerous than anger. Behind him stood Major Collins and Captain Rodriguez, their presence making it clear that this was an official proceeding with career-ending implications. "Staff Sergeant Richards," Thompson began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Explain to me what happened at the North checkpoint this morning." Richards swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "Sir, I was conducting enhanced security, screening of contractor personnel in preparation for the Inspector General's audit. The individual in question was asked to verify that she wasn't carrying unauthorized electronic devices. Asked? Thompson's voice carried a dangerous edge. "That's your characterization of what happened?" "Sir, I followed proper security protocols for screening non-military personnel." Thompson opened a folder on his desk and began reading from an official document. "According to multiple witnesses, you ordered a contractor to remove her clothing. In full view of assembled personnel, you allowed that contractor to be photographed by junior enlisted soldiers. You subjected someone with a higher security clearance than your own to public humiliation based on your personal interpretation of regulations. You clearly don't understand." Richard's face went pale. "Sir, I didn't know about any special clearance." "That's exactly the point, Sergeant. You didn't know. You made assumptions about someone based on appearance and decided to abuse your authority for your own entertainment." Thompson leaned forward. "Do you have any idea who you humiliated today?" "A contractor, sir. A decorated veteran whose service record is classified at levels you don't have access to. Someone who has sacrificed more for this country than you can possibly imagine. Someone who earned the right to be treated with respect through service. In operations that officially never happened." The room fell silent except for the sound of Richard's increasingly rapid breathing. Mills looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and the senior officers maintained expressions of professional disgust. Thompson continued, his voice never rising but carrying increasing weight with each word. "The woman you stripped and mocked today has scars from wounds received in service to this nation. Wounds that came from operations designed to keep people like you safe enough to play petty power games at security checkpoints. Sir, I had no way of knowing." "Stop." Thompson's voice cut through Richard's attempt at explanation like a blade. "You had every way of knowing. You had regulations that clearly defined proper screening procedures. You had a chain of command you could have consulted. You had common decency that should have prevented you from humiliating another human being for your own entertainment." Thompson stood up, his presence filling the room with authority that made everyone else seem smaller. "Instead, you chose to abuse your position because you thought you had found someone vulnerable you could push around. You turned military security into a power game, and you did it in full view of soldiers who looked to NCOs for examples of how to behave." The meeting lasted 35 minutes total. When Richards emerged, his face was pale, and his career trajectory had changed permanently. Extra duty for 10 weeks. Mandatory training on proper treatment of classified personnel. A letter of reprimand in his permanent file that would follow him for the rest of his military service. And a recommendation that he spend considerable time thinking about what leadership actually meant before he would be considered for any position of increased responsibility. But the real consequences were already spreading through Fort Kellerman, like ripples in a pond. By evening chow, every crew chief and maintenance supervisor had heard some version of what happened at the North Checkpoint. The details varied, but the core message was consistent. Respect wasn't something you withheld until people proved they deserved it. 3 weeks later, when the next civilian contractor arrived for electrical maintenance, the atmosphere at Fort Kellerman was completely different. The security screening was professional, courteous, and efficient. Personnel asked about qualifications instead of making assumptions, offered assistance instead of creating obstacles, and treated everyone with the kind of respect that should have been standard from the beginning. Master Sergeant Williams made the incident part of his orientation program for new personnel. Not the specific details that remain classified, but the principle behind it. Excellence didn't announce itself with fanfare. It just showed up, did the necessary work, and left things better than it found them. Colonel Thompson kept Rebecca's maintenance report on his desk for months afterward, not because her recommendations were unusual, though they had prevented 3 potential infrastructure failures, but because it represented something he wanted his personnel to remember. Real competence was often quiet. Real heroes were often unrecognized, and real respect was earned through character rather than volume. 6 months after the incident at Fort Kellerman, Rebecca Martinez completed her final contracted repair at the base and submitted her equipment to the supply sergeant for accountability. Her work over that period had identified and prevented dozens of potential failures, improved system efficiency by measurable percentages, and established maintenance protocols that would serve the installation for years to come. The base she left behind was fundamentally different from the one where she had been publicly humiliated by a junior NCO with authority issues. The change wasn't dramatic or obvious to casual observers, but it was real and lasting in ways that mattered to the people who served there. New personnel arriving at Fort Kellerman went through orientation programs that emphasized respect for all personnel regardless of rank, position, or appearance. Security screening procedures were conducted with professional courtesy rather than adversarial suspicion. The assumption had shifted from treating people as potential threats to treating them as fellow professionals until they proved otherwise. Staff Sergeant Richards completed his corrective training and returned to duty as a different kind of leader. The experience had been humbling in ways that forced him to examine his own motivations and behavior. He would never again assume that quiet competence indicated weakness or that civilian status meant someone was safe to push around. His training had included detailed instruction on the treatment of personnel with classified backgrounds, the legal requirements for respecting security clearances he didn't have access to, and the professional standards expected of military leaders in all circumstances. More importantly, he had learned that real authority came from earning respect rather than demanding it. Master Sergeant Williams incorporated lessons from the incident into his professional development program for junior NCOs. The sessions focused on recognizing competence in unexpected places, understanding that many veterans transitioned to civilian careers that didn't reflect their military experience, and remembering that respect was something you gave freely rather than something you withheld until people earned it. The story of what happened that morning became part of the unofficial culture at Fort Kellerman, passed down through shift briefings and maintenance meetings, through NCO discussions and casual conversations over coffee in the enlisted club. Not the gossip version with exaggerated details, but the principle behind it. Treat people with dignity until they prove they don't deserve it. Ask questions before making judgments, and remember that you never know who you're dealing with until it might be too late to change your approach. Colonel Thompson was promoted to Brigadier General 18 months later, in part because his leadership during the incident had demonstrated the kind of judgment and character that senior commanders valued. His handling of the situation had prevented a potential scandal while reinforcing the military's commitment to treating all personnel with appropriate respect. In his farewell address to the base, Thompson spoke about the importance of recognizing excellence in unexpected places and remembering that the military's greatest strength came from the diverse backgrounds and experiences of the people who chose to serve. He never mentioned Rebecca by name, but everyone who had been there that morning understood what he was talking about. The security checkpoint where the incident occurred was eventually renamed the Martinez Gate in honor of all contractor personnel who supported military operations, though the specific reason for the name change remained classified. New personnel assigned to checkpoint duty received additional training on proper screening procedures and the importance of maintaining professional standards in all interactions. Private Jackson, who had recorded the incident on his phone, completed his enlistment and transitioned to civilian life with a much deeper understanding of respect and dignity than he had possessed as a young soldier looking for entertainment. The experience had taught him that other people's pain wasn't content for social media, and that real strength often appeared quiet and unassuming. Years later, when Jackson became a supervisor at a civilian company, he made sure his employees understood that everyone deserved professional treatment regardless of their background or appearance. The lesson he had learned at Fort Kellerman about the danger of assumptions stayed with him throughout his career. Rebecca Martinez continued her quiet work at military installations across the country, her service record remaining classified, her sacrifices unrecognized by the public, her stories untold in any official history. But she left behind a trail of improved systems, prevented failures, and changed attitudes wherever she worked. The scar that had silenced a checkpoint full of soldiers remained with her as a permanent reminder of service in places that didn't exist on official maps, doing work that never appeared in field manuals, for missions that were classified beyond the reach of normal military bureaucracy. But it was also a reminder that survival was possible, that wounds could heal, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought quietly, one professional interaction at a time. She never spoke publicly about what happened at Fort Kellerman, never sought recognition for the way she had handled public humiliation with dignity, never demanded apologies from the people who had treated her with disrespect. Instead, she simply continued showing up, doing excellent work, and demonstrating through her actions what real strength looked like. The military installations where she worked became better places because of her presence, not because she demanded change, but because she embodied the professional standards that inspired others to rise to her level. Equipment functioned more reliably, maintenance procedures improved, and personnel learned to recognize competence regardless of how it was packaged. In the end, the incident at Fort Kellerman became more than just a story about one woman's dignity in the face of disrespect. It became a reminder that heroism often wore civilian clothes, that sacrifice didn't always come with recognition ceremonies, and that sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who didn't need to tell you how dangerous they were. The desert wind still blew across Fort Kellerman every afternoon, carrying the scents of hot metal and diesel fuel that defined military life in that part of the world. But it also carried something else now, the understanding that respect was earned through character rather than volume, that quiet competence deserved recognition, and that the heroes hiding in plain sight were often the ones most worth knowing. Staff Sergeant Richards, now a more mature leader, would sometimes stand at the Martinez gate and remember the morning when his assumptions about a quiet contractor had been shattered by the sight of scars that told stories he would never fully understand. The memory served as a permanent reminder that leadership meant protecting people rather than pushing them around, and that real authority came from earning respect rather than demanding it. Should scars like Rebecca's ever have to be revealed just to earn basic respect? The question lingered in the minds of everyone who witnessed what happened that morning, a reminder that dignity was something every person deserved regardless of their background, appearance, or willingness to fight for it. The story didn't go viral, didn't make headlines, didn't become a social media sensation, but it changed everything for the people who lived it, creating ripples that spread through military culture in ways that mattered more than temporary internet fame. Because sometimes the most important victories happen quietly, one changed attitude at a time, one moment of recognition at a time, one act of respect at a time. And sometimes the heroes who change the world are the ones who never ask for credit, never demand recognition, and never stop showing up to do the work that keeps everyone else safe. Rebecca Martinez walked away from Fort Kellerman that final day with the same quiet dignity she had carried into it, her tool bag balanced in her right hand, her professional reputation intact, and her mission complete. Behind her, she left a military installation full of people who would never again assume that silence meant weakness or that someone working alone was someone they could safely ignore. The desert sun continued to beat down on the concrete pathways. The generators continued their constant hum, and the helicopters continued their steady rhythm overhead. But something fundamental had changed in that place. Something that would outlast personnel rotations and command changes. Something that would influence how people treated each other for years to come. Because the most powerful lessons are often learned not through lectures or training programs, but through witnessing real character under pressure, real dignity in the face of disrespect, and real strength that needed no announcement to make its presence known. The quiet ones do have stories, and sometimes those stories change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Your support means everything to us, and every like, share, And comment helps us bring you more incredible stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thanks for being part of our journey, and we'll see you in the next story.